Dr. Ravussin, thank you so much for agreeing to do the podcast. I recently saw a study, and I don't even know how recent it is, but or before we dive off into that, can you introduce yourself and let everybody know what your credentials are and all that good stuff before we dive into it?
I'm Eric Ravussin, and I'm Associate Executive Director for Clinical Science at Pennington Biomedical Research Center. And I'm originally from Switzerland. I'm a human physiologist and worked all my career in terms of energy balance and the relationship between obesity and type 2 diabetes.
That is right up our alley. Mike and I, we started the podcast initially to talk to local businesses, but we've kind of ventured off into this health realm, and we like talking with people that are experts in their field with diet, running, working out. Can you talk about the study and how it was conducted? From my understanding, you got 200 people to be part of the study, and you gathered data on how they ate even before you dived off into taking their blood work and things like that. Is that right?
Yeah. Anyway, this was a study funded by the National Institute on Aging. And as you may know, caloric restriction, even in non-obese animals or non-obese people, extend lifespan. And it's been known now for about almost 50 years. And I was fortunate enough to meet one of the two authors of a very critical textbook, which was all the advantage of caloric restriction. You know, I'm not talking about caloric restriction for weight loss, because we know that, you know, if you lose weight, you improve your metabolic health, you improve your cardiovascular risk factors, you improve your type 2 diabetes risk factors. But here it's to take people who are not overweight or obese and put them on caloric restriction, because we know from studies from worms to mice and rats that if you calorie restrict animal, they live longer. And it's not only the average lifespan, but it's also the maximum lifespan. In other words, you know, you would the 10% longest lived animal really live longer. But also the average lifespan, which is, you know, in a population, it's when you lose half of the population, is shifted to the right. It means on average, population live longer. Exercise makes you live longer on average. Doesn't mean it benefits everyone.
I was interested. It seemed like 14% was that magic number of restricting calories. Was that based on 2,000 calories?
Yeah, no, what we did, first of all, this is a study which was conducted and finished in 2011. You know, we had ancillary studies or ancillary grants, like we say. And one of the grant was really to study in more depth what we call immune function. Because, you know, the caloric restriction, as like I mentioned, influence and benefit cardiovascular risk factors, lower blood pressure, improve lipid profile. It increase insulin sensitivity, which is a risk factor for the development of type 2 diabetes. But it also impacts immune function or resistance to infections. And this is what we were interested in this study. And what we did was to measure in an ancillary study, not on the 200 people, but only those were studied in Baton Rouge. We measured the volume of their thymus. You know, the older you get, the smaller the thymus is. And the thymus is producing these T cells, which are basically immune cells, which respond to infections. I mean, I'm sure now with COVID, you are well aware of what is immunity, you know, immune function. And we noticed that after 2 years of caloric restriction, there was a enlargement of the thymus, which, you know, with age, it goes down and down, and it's infiltrated by fat. And here there was a reversal of these two things. Then we looked at these T cells in the blood, these immune cells, and they were increased. In other words, there was an improved production of T cells, or these cells fighting infections. And then my colleague, who moved from Baton Rouge then to Yale, looked at the expression of genes in the adipose tissue, found some very, very interesting gene, and started to do what we call mechanistic study. He knocked out this gene in mice, and he showed that the mice were living longer, had better immune function. And that's why it makes a very long study, because the initial observation, and when you talk about this 14% caloric restriction, it's not a magic number, it's by chance. The average was 14%. We were trying to get 25% on people. But you live in an environment which is not conducive to caloric restriction, especially in lean people. And they did achieve 14%, and this 14% improved their immune function. And we went after genes and mechanisms which were underlying this improvement.
So if an average person wanted to pursue the gains from the study, what would they do to achieve this 14%? Like, actually.
I'm sorry, I missed the 2,000 calories that you said. First of all, 2,000 calories is okay for the pyramid, the dietary guidelines. And it's 2,000 in women and maybe 2,500 in men. But this is an average number. What we did was to measure the energy requirement of all our people in the study by what we call doubly labeled water. You measure the energy expenditure of people over a period of 2 weeks. And we repeated these measures 2 times. It means we had 1 month of titration of how many calories people burn. And then we reduced this by 25%. This was the target. But they were free living. And we measured how much they ate. And at the end of the 2 years, the first 6 months, they were close to 20%. Then the next 6 months, it was more like 16%. And towards the end, the last 6 months, it was more like 10 to 11% on average. But the average over the 2 years was 14%.
This podcast episode is brought to you by BCN Supplements. Mike and I have teamed up with BCN, and we're so excited about it. Now, if you're new to the fitness world or you're just starting to get in, BCN has legitimately everything you're looking for, whether you want healthier hair, skin, nails, if you want to get a good pre-workout drink, or if you want a vitamin, BCN has what you need. One of their products I love is their collagen mix. It's legitimately so easy to use. I know what you're thinking, why is a guy taking collagen? But it helps with everything. Muscle recovery, muscle mass. It helps with your hair, skin elasticity, and you can take it with anything. You can put it in water. You can put it in pancake mix. I take protein pancake mix, so I like to use it in that. Or you can put it in coffee if you're on the go. Just 1 scoop is all you need, and you're going to help your hair, your skin, muscle mass, your joints, everything. Head to bcnsubs.com to place your order today, and be sure to use CWJM to receive a whopping 10% off your next purchase. And be sure to check them out on Instagram at BCN Supplements. BCN Supplements, helping build a better you from the inside out. So for the folks listening, that's not a lot. That's, we always hear the 2,000 calories, as like you said, is just an average, but that's less than 300 calories a day. And people, we're seeing these great results. Were y'all dictating or guiding individuals on what to eat during this time, or was it kind of free range? They ate normal?
We had 2 studies. The first study was a feasibility study, and this was a 6-month study. And we entirely fed the people for 3 months to teach them how to eat and all that. And then the next 3 months was by themselves. Now, in the second study, and the one that we are talking about now, the 2-year study, we taught the people for 1 month without feeding them, but they could choose two different strategies: the Mediterranean diet or low-fat diet. And those are, more adequate to caloric restriction and all that. It's pleasing to people and kind of things. And they were seen first on a bi-weekly visits, at our institution, and we were weighing them, we were answering questions, we were reviewing their diet or their dietary record and helping them with a behavioral team. And then it became more like, after 3 months, it became more like once a month and so on. And then we had, measurements, a lot of measurements at 6 months, 12 months, and 2 years. And anyway, there was a lot of hands-on these people. They couldn't travel to Europe for 2 months or these kind of things, but they lived their own life and they had their own diet. And despite the fact that they were normal weight, they still lost 10% of their body weight on average.
That's pretty amazing. Did you notice any substantial differences between people that maintain the diet that y'all were recommending versus people that kind of ventured back off into their own diet?
No, because the goal was really caloric restriction, and the studies in animals is mostly independent of the source of the calories: carbohydrate, protein, or lipids or fat. And that's why, the goal was really to try to help these people to reduce the amount of calories. And we gave them two options, but they could deviate. And, it's a 2-year study. And it's not like we put people in jail and throw them the food in the cage like you do in monkeys and rats.
Well, yeah, that's true. I know you, I know you separated the Mediterranean and the low carb people.
Low fat.
I'm sorry. Were y'all able to compare those at least and see if there's better results with the two, if those people were maintaining that pretty strictly?
We didn't do that. Again, the emphasis was on caloric restriction, regardless of the composition of the diet. But it's been done over and over for weight loss studies, and you misspell and you said low carb because low carb now is the miracle diet and all that. But low fat is still the easiest diet to cut down the calories. But we didn't do the analysis that you are suggesting. And I don't think we could. Yeah, we have tons of dietary records. We can go back to what they reported. This is self-reported. We don't know if it's true. People are very quick in lying in what they eat and what they don't eat. And I think it would be still possible to look if we have better results one way or another.
Doing a controlled study, from what I'm reading, is pretty intensive and hard. So what made y'all want to do a controlled study versus an observational study?
Yeah, as scientists, it's difficult to work with humans in terms of adherence to whatever, prescription you give them. I'm working on a grant on sleep restriction versus duration of sleep, which is adequate. And you can say whatever you want to the people, unless you have them controlled and you feed them. For example, I'm also part now of a big study, which is a feeding study. It's nutrition for precision health. And here we're going to feed people because we want the answer. Now, can they do that by themselves? Some people can do that and some can't. And, this is what is observational studies. There is a lot of noise because you have a lot of people who are not adhering to the prescription. And that's why when we try to do studies, if we want the scientific answer, we try to control it as much as we can.
So personally, when you see an observational study put out results, do you not put a lot of weight into that? Because personally, I'm starting to see if it says observational study done, I'm like, I don't believe it almost.
Yeah, I think epidemiology is very important. And, when you have to manage a public health message, you need to you need the message for the population that you are talking to. And the population is following different strategies. And I think observational study, when you collect a lot of data of what people eat, what people exercise, now with these wearables, we have more and more control on people. And, if you wear a Fitbit or an Actigraph and all that, and you can see the data, I mean, you trust what you see. Now, when it comes to blood sugar, for example, you have these continuous glucose monitoring, and we use more and more of that, and it becomes more precise and less subjective. But, it's I wouldn't discard the observational studies, because that's really at the population level. But if you want to understand the mechanism underlying, let's say, health benefits, you need to make sure that people are doing what you think they are doing.
So I know a lot of the listeners and viewers think that living longer is definitely a good thing, but I'm sure they're going to be concerned. Is there any markers that I don't know if scientifically you can see, but of any signs of aging too, like visually, like does diet restriction, hold off the age factor as far as how you look and wrinkles and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, but I have a lot of talks that I give around, and let's say wrinkles. It's really bad. This is not a good biomarker of aging. But there are biomarkers of aging. Physical fitness, your VO2 max is a good one. Insulin sensitivity. If you have lower insulin level for your given diet, it's a good biomarker of aging. Lung capacity is a good biomarker of aging. What else? Now if I go in more details, your core temperature. It seems, with caloric restriction, you drop your core temperature by about 0.5 degree Celsius. And this is associated with benefits. And if you go more in mechanism, you also drop your metabolic rate, your resting metabolic rate, more than what you would expect on the basis of the weight loss. And you have less oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is a byproduct of your metabolism. Basically, some of the oxygen is not used just to oxidize fat, lipid, carbohydrate, or protein, but some of them is bypassed and produce what we call reactive oxygen species. And those are damaging your DNA, damaging your protein. Your skin, of course, is not as healthy at age 70 like mine or your age, and so on. That's why, there is some solid biomarkers of aging and some more anecdotal, and wrinkles or this kind of things is really anecdotal. And I have this beautiful picture of two people being 90 and one being, wrinkled like an old apple, and the other one being, shiny and smooth.
Circling back to the thymus, for folks that don't really know what that is, can you explain what the purpose of the thymus is, and kind of more what you saw on the results side of it?
Yeah, the thymus there are two places where immune cells are produced. It's in your bone marrow and the thymus, which is located, in your neck. And this there are two immune function. You have the antibodies going back to COVID-19. You know that you can have a quick test of measuring the quick response to an infection, and this is called antibodies. And then you mount another immune reaction, which are cells targeting the pathogen or the virus or the agent, and those are called macrophages and T cells and leukocyte, and those are produced by this thymus. And this was our first approach. And we realized that just with 2 years of caloric restriction, you had a healthier thymus and it was producing more of these T cells.
Mm. How does fasting play into this? Do you consider fasting in the same regard of caloric restriction? Would that also boost the health of the thymus?
I don't think we have, caloric restriction does. And, usually you fast longer when you calorie restrict yourself because you're going to skip, one of the strategy we gave to our participants was try not to snack and skip the late, night snacks and things like that. Therefore, they had longer fast. But I'm very interested in time-restricted feeding or time-restricted eating or alternate day fast and these kind of things. But I don't think we have good data to say that it would improve immune function. But I wouldn't be surprised that it does.
Is that something that you practice personally? Do you practice intermittent fasting or cutting calories on a daily basis?
I try not to snack. I grew up in Europe, and my grandmother told me, you have a breakfast, a lunch, and a snack when you come back from school, and then you have a dinner, and that's it. And you never eat in between that. And this is my upbringing. But knowing what I know now, I try, let's say, after dinner at 7:30. I have a few drinks sometimes. But,
have a couple gallons of ice cream.
no snacking and all that. But I'm not trying. I always say I've been exercising all my life to eat all what I want because eating is a good pleasure.
Yeah. That's something I think we've all, myself, I've been raised that way. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Lunch is always a big meal. And then historically in my life, dinner has always been the largest meal of the day. But it seems like the more I read and the more we've learned talking to folks like yourself on the podcast, that's not right. That's not how we were built historically in our ancestors and our primal days. We didn't really eat that way. So it's interesting to hear you talk about that.
Absolutely. I have done a lot of study on the concept of feast and famine. I worked for 14 years with the Pima Indians in Arizona. And the Pima Indians have the highest prevalence in the world of type 2 diabetes and the second highest prevalence of obesity. And it's not because they are sloth and glutton. It's just because they have evolved as a population to survive periods of famines. And you take all the Pacific Islanders, it's the same way. They have the highest prevalence of obesity and type 2 diabetes. And it was called even the thrifty genotype, but nobody has been able to say there is one gene. It's really a set of genes. And, when you have periods of famines, the fattest babies are surviving. Those who could store as much calories as possible and so on. And you have generations of that. And like you said, we didn't evolve to be exposed to constant food, and now it's even worse because the food is very, very good, very cheap, palatable and good. This is what nutrition companies are striving for because they want to sell their stuff. And what you do for that, you put refined carbohydrate, you put fat, and this is the perfect storm for a unhealthy nutrition. Now, to go back to your question about breakfast, this is one thing, except for the weekend when I want to have a nice time with my wife, I don't eat breakfast, and because it's a longer fast. And our studies and some from others now on time-restricted feeding has clearly shown that the longer the duration of fasting, the lower your insulin, and therefore the higher the fat mobilization from your adipose tissue and the fat oxidation. And this is what fat was good for our ancestors because they allowed to survive famines. But now fat is bad when you have no famines and plenty of food all the time.
Do you think that's more because we'll overeat fat? Do you think if we were eating like they were eating fat, kind of restrictive and less per day, do you think it'd be just as good? And the fact that we're just overeating it, just the fact that overeating anything makes you a little unhealthy?
Yeah, but again, when I first came to this country, I was shocked to see all these cup holders in cars and people going to the driveway and getting their food and eating all the time. And it's to me, we're not going to solve obesity by drugs and bariatric surgery. We're going to solve it by some reversal of this nasty environment. And I'm sorry to say, but in Holland, they banned the trans fat in the 70s. It's only in the early 2000s that the trans fat were banned in the US. And it's an important point when it comes to public health. And there is too much lobbying of food companies when it comes to public health because, they want to sell their stuff and they produce the stuff with very good taste and at cheap. I mean, think about compared to 50 years ago, the percentage of your salary which goes for food is very, very low compared to 50 years ago, or even lower 100 years ago.
Mm. What I've heard in the past on fasting, which is relative to, what we're talking about, did y'all do any monitoring on the actual human cells when they did this restriction? Because you hear like when you do long-term fasts, like your body will start producing more stem cells, and that's its way of healing itself and healing the cells around it. Did y'all do any monitor on that during your study?
No, but we took a lot of tissues, and the study that you referred to, this gene, which you knock out in a mice and first of all make the mice resistant to dietary induced obesity by high fat diet. It is resistant to fat gain. And second, it lives longer. But it came from a gene that we discovered in the adipose tissue. I mean, don't ask me why, but I mean, it's interesting because there is two tissues that we took in this study beside bloods and saliva and air, but it's muscle tissue, skeletal muscle tissue, and adipose tissue, and we looked at that. But we have not looked at, basically cell cycle. When you say senescence and new stem cells, we have not looked at that.
What's your thoughts on this carnivore diet that has kind of picked up some public steam in the last couple of months? There's a segment of population that have cured autoimmune disease, some skin rashes, have dropped tons of weight only eating animal food or animal meat. What's your take on that? It's kind of vastly different from, the vegan diet or even kind of the low carb diet. It's, completely opposite of what we normally think of when we think of diet fads.
Yeah. And this is what it is. And I think that unless you have real study, first of all, you start with the epidemiology. And the higher the meat content of the diet, the worse it is for your health and your longevity. That's why just from observational study, I would say it's not a good idea. And then you do controlled studies and you randomize people, to groups of high meat diet versus medium versus very low. And you look at outcomes, whatever they are. I mean, they can be cardiovascular risk factors, diabetes risk factors, or quality of life. And this is what you do. And until we have that, I would call it, a fad diet.
Yeah.
I had another question about your opinion on something. I know you do a lot of research and you have that sleep study you're talking about, you referenced earlier. I know me and Jon and the vast majority of America and other countries are pretty addicted to coffee. and I know that it's a hinder on sleep and all that. Have you done any studies on the long-term effects of coffee, or even short-term effects?
No, not really. But when I was doing my PhD, I'm from Switzerland, and Nestle funded a study for us to look at the impact of caffeine on resting energy expenditure, or RMR. And this is what we did, and we did quite a few studies. And indeed, it increases your sympathetic nervous system activity. That's why you sleep less. It increases your energy expenditure. And, it's been, caffeine and ephedrine have been used for weight loss, in the past. But I mean, in terms of all the impact on health, no, I've not done studies. But I mean, there are tons of studies looking at the impact of all the start with caffeine and theine and all these kind of things, and going towards, all the plant, polyphenols,
There's what's the name of that author, Matthew Parker?
How you sleep.
Have you read that book, Why We Sleep?
Obviously.
It's a good book. It's
the name of the book.
It's called Why We Sleep.
Yeah, no.
There's a neuroscientist. He teaches out of Berkeley. I think his name's Matthew Parker. But he wrote this book of Why We Sleep, and in that book, he talks about the half-life of caffeine staying in your body. It's upwards to 7 to 8 hours. I'm sure if you reached out to him, he'd be willing to talk to you. But I'm 100% or 90% sure he teaches at Berkeley. But it was a very interesting book, because what he was saying about sleep was it's not a bank. You can't make a deposit and catch up on it later. Once you lose it, it's gone, and we're basically killing ourselves every day staying awake. It's pretty scary when you start thinking about it.
And you don't ever get into your REM cycles, is what he says too, which makes me really not want to drink coffee, because that's where all your restorative sleep comes from.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's funny, because I just interrupted. I'm reading a grant from one of my junior faculty, and it's all about basically overfeeding and sleep restriction. It's the perfect storm again. In terms of metabolic health. And, that's a randomized crossover study, and she has to submit that to NIH for March 5th. But anyway, all these behavioral disturbances, less sleep and snacking and all that are the perfect storm for screwing up our health.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll ever get into a long-term study on actual fasting for multiple days, or?
We have now, and this is a colleague of mine, Leanne Redman, and she's starting, because at Pennington we did the first time-restricted feeding in people. We published that in Cell Metabolism. And now, again, NIA had what they call an RFA, request for application, for studies, longer-term studies of time-restricted feeding. And at Pennington, we got this grant, and Leanne Redman, who was a postdoc with me, is now, they are designing a pilot phase, and then to go for a 5-year study, 5-year duration. This is enormous. Now, how do you keep people in a study for 5 years? It's a challenge. But, for 2 years of caloric restriction, we lost less than 10% of our people. And it was by screening them very carefully. I mean, if you take the first come, and because there is a compensation for time, of so many dollars, I mean, you lose these people after 2 months. And that's why the screening is important. But then you can say, then you have a biased population, because they were screened to be good citizens, if you want. Anyway, you cannot win with these studies. But yes, the answer is there is a huge interest in fasting, and mostly time-restricted feeding.
Has random question. I'm not as involved in these studies as you, but you know, the controlled study we're talking about where you have a little bit more control. I know ethics gets in the way of like being able to like, you're not going to lock anybody up, but is there a better way to make sure that they're ingesting the things that you need to, or basically not cheating? Is there a way to do that ethically?
Yeah, once again, there are wearables which are developed, and you have the number of chews and things like that. You have, if you put a CGM and the person tell you, no, I didn't have a calorie, the whole afternoon, but you have a peak in blood sugar, that's not true. And now Amazon and all this, or Google, are really going after, Google as a lens to measure your blood sugar. I mean, contact lens, like you would wear for sight to measure your blood sugar. I have been talking for 25 years of a collar that you would put on a necklace, which would count your calories from fat, carbohydrate, and protein. And I'm sure it's going to happen one day. But I mean, there's a lot of progress towards that. But on the other hand, we still do inpatient studies, and where we control. I did an overfeeding study of 8 weeks, and they were inpatient, and we fed them everything, and they couldn't go to the bathroom during their meal. They were by the nurse's station at our place, and they had to eat everything, and they gained 7.7 kilos on average over 8 weeks, which is 18 pounds or something like this. And I think control studies are very, very important. But once again, it's difficult to find volunteers for these studies because they need to be unemployed or rich and willing to give their time for the sake of science.
Has your team or yourself, have y'all maintained contact with any of those 200 participants that took place in the study, and what does their life look like after? Because I know you said it was wrapped up in 2011, right? Or 2012?
Yeah. And the answer is, first of all, we had 3 sites for this study. There was WashU in St. Louis, Tufts in Boston, and Pennington in Baton Rouge. And we had a follow-up of our people, like it was 2 or 3 years ago, and we published the data. But now there is NRA has funded a short study, which is to recall. It's going to be 10 to 11 years after, because we're going to start that this fall. And like I said, it finished in 2012. But some of the finishes were like 2 or 3 years before, because we didn't study all these people during the same 2 years. I mean, they are enrolled, on a timeline basis. And we will have some data. Now, how many are we going to recapture? Surprisingly, we have been able to identify approximately 80% of the people.
Wow.
And now I think they are all willing to come for a short visit. It's going to be weight and height and questionnaires. What did you learn? I know some of our people in Baton Rouge. I mean, there is one who is practicing caloric restriction religiously. And he has continued. He said, hey, I learned so much during these 2 years. I know it's good for my health. I feel much better, and so on. And he's continuing.
Yeah, that would be very interesting to read your follow-up that y'all publish, because I'd be willing to see, or I'd be willing to bet that the people that saw a large benefit from the caloric restriction maintained it even after all this time.
Yeah.
So, as a general message,
I think the quality of life. Are you aware of this group called the Cronies?
No.
Cronies, CRONIES. It's Caloric Restriction Optimal Nutrition Society, and there's about 400 members, but there's about 50 to 80 people who have been practicing caloric restriction religiously. They don't exercise because they know that exercise is going to drive their food intake, and they don't exercise. For example, they are very religious. And I think, I was invited a couple of times to their meeting in California, and they are a very, very interesting group. But, it's too extreme, their approach to that. But they know very well nutrition, and they practice this caloric restriction kind of religiously. Sanjay Gupta on CNN did a program on them.
Okay.
Anyway, they have a lack of libido, and they have their quality of life, I don't think, is as high as it should be, because it's too extreme.
Where are they based out of again?
They are all over the country. Google cronies. You'll find, but there's maybe 400 members, but like I said, there's maybe 50 to 60 or 70 who are really, and there is quite a few publication. Luigi, I'm blocking his last name. Luigi, not Ferrucci, but the other Luigi, aging scientist, has published a few papers on them. And because we compared some of our calorie restriction people from Calorie to these cronies.
That's very interesting. The fact that they don't work out, because you would think all the scientific studies with bone density. There's even a lot of older gentlemen that are really into the workout world. They say that grip strength and your gluteus, your butt strength is very beneficial to prevent falling down, and having adequate grip strength is good to prevent falls and stuff like that. So you would think it's weird that they don't exercise.
Yeah, because they know about the benefit of caloric restriction, and they want to have less calories going in. But I'm with you. I think they are not as healthy as if they were doing some exercise. And you are right. I mean, the major predictor of mortality is fall in older age, and sarcopenia is a big problem. And
it's almost like an excuse. I bet they're just like, I don't want to work out, but I'm gonna eat healthy.
I don't know. They seem like they're pretty into the diet if they don't want to do it because they don't want to replace the calories lost.
Yeah.
But I wonder if they look really aesthetic, like young, and there's this group that looks really young.
No. Google them and you'll see pictures.
I'm gonna do it.
Okay,
you'll be the judge.
I think I know the answer though.
But I mean, reproductive function. You mentioned bone. I mean, those are really, and of course, skeletal muscle mass are really problems if you are too far into caloric restriction.
Yeah. Peter Attia, I think, is the guy I've heard. I think he has his own podcast, but he talks about grip strength.
Yeah, he's, we did a study on a ketogenic diet with him and Gary Taubes, the guy who writes for the New York Times. And now he dragged me into his, how is it called, his new things? I have his app, I think.
Uh-oh, he's tracking you now.
No. How is it called? I can't find it. It's Zero, I think.
Oh yeah, I've heard that.
Something like this, Zero. But anyway, he's driving that, and he's a bright guy.
Yeah, no, he's very smart. Hearing him explain the nuances of grip strength, he goes really in depth. But he talks about all these different workouts, from dead hanging to like these farmer carries, and the benefits of each. He talks about like each finger strength, like each bone in your finger to your wrist. He's very smart about it. That's cool. So doctor, I know we're getting close on your time, but as a wrap up, if you could summarize something for our listeners, what's the biggest takeaway from the study that if you could help people from a health perspective or from a fitness perspective, what's the one takeaway that they could take from this podcast or from the study?
Study itself, it's all about caloric restriction in non-obese people. But in general, for health, the major threat to health is really obesity and the associated disease. I mean, you know that 13 forms of cancers are related to obesity. You know, cardiovascular disease, I mean, hypertension, strokes, and vascular health are related to obesity. You know, diabetes is related to obesity. The first thing is to tackle obesity. I remember when I was president of the Obesity Society in North America, we had the director of the Congress Budget Office. He came to present that it was in 2007 that the entire budget of 2007 would be necessary for public health. The entire US budget would be only for public health in 2035. And the public health budget is about 10% of the entire budget. And, the first message is we have to do something about obesity. And the second message is that those who are lucky enough to not to be obese because of their parents or their genes and things like that, or they fight the environment. I never parked in the handicap parking spot, but a lot of people wants to go as close as possible to the store door. The second message is really if you can maintain, regardless of obesity or weight, a lower energy intake, I think it's a good thing. And there are strategies coming out like this fasting or alternate day fast or the 5-2 approach or, the time restricted eating. And I think that those are showing to be good for metabolic health in general. And the rest is to stay active. Like you said, I think falls are major predictors of mortality, and it means, you have to maintain a skeletal mass. After that, it's the cognitive function, which is another problem. And here, I think we are a little bit more far from solution than just for physical functionality and aging.
We're spending too much time on our mobile devices, huh? And not reading enough books like you have behind you.
People need to follow him. Look how good he looks at 70.
I know. Jeez. You look like $1 million right now.
You looking in the mirror right now?
Well, Doctor, I greatly appreciate your time. It was fun. Do you do social media or anything like that?
No, I try to. I have Facebook, but if you have a podcast, I will post it on because your goal. I'm sorry, I didn't do my homework. You do podcasts and
so our podcast is called,
I just saw you are among the 10 top percent.
Yeah, so we our podcast is based on curiosity. We like talking with all different types of people, from business owners to athletes, to political people, to doctors, and we it's like having dinner with friends. We don't only talk about one subject. We like to learn about all different types of subjects. Mike and I have a real keen liking to health and fitness. So when I saw a summary of your study on sciencetech.com. And I thought it'd be real interesting to hear you talk about the thymus and the benefits of calorie restriction. And so we had a good time.
Yeah. And he's done a lot of intermittent fasting, and I got off in the weeds with multiple day fasts. So I was really curious as to what you had to say today.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, appreciate your time, Doctor.
Yeah. Send me.